the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 13th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, scheduled to take place from December 12 to 14, 2024, in Rabat, Morocco. This flagship event will convene over 400 distinguished leaders from the public and private sectors, civil society, international organizations, think tanks, and the media across the Atlantic Basin, fostering open and candid discussions on pivotal cross-regional and cross-sectoral challenges. This year's conference marks a significant evolution, transitioning from annual thematic focuses to a broader, more inclusive approach emphasizing the wider Atlantic space's core values and strategic importance. The agenda will delve into critical topics such as geoeconomics, regional security, democracy, migration, and the energy transition, with a particular emphasis on the African Atlantic region. Participants will engage in over 11 plenary sessions, interactive town halls, thematic breakout dinners, and intimate night owl sessions, all designed to encourage meaningful dialogue. The Atlantic Dialogues Emerging Leaders 2024 program will bring together more than 40 young changemakers across the Atlantic. These emerging leaders will participate in a tailored leadership, policy and networking program, fostering intergenerational dialogue and bridging generational and perception gaps. Building on the previous 12 editions, this 13th edition will be a platform conducive to navigating the complexities of the Atlantic region and working collaboratively towards a more integrated and prosperous wider Atlantic. For more information, visit our website, atlanticdialogues.org. وحيدوا الموسيقى باش ندير لها. Ladies and gentlemen, the Policy Center for the New South welcomes you to the 13th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues. The first session is about to begin. Translation is available for this session. Channel 1 is for English. Channel 2 is for French. Channel 3 is for Arabic, and Channel 4 is for Spanish. And now, please welcome to the stage the moderator for the launch of the 11th edition of the Atlantic Currents, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, Mohammed Lulishki. And our speakers for this session: Fabio Albergaria de Queiroz, researcher at the Brazilian Defense College. Alan Hirsch, research fellow at the New South Institute. Shadia Maturin, founder and director at Waconte. And Santiago Teodulos, strategy director at Bloomsbury Policy Group. Mohammed Lulishki, the floor is yours.
The warm welcome of on behalf of the Executive President of the Policy Center for the New South and all.
Je souhaite la bienvenue à l'ensemble des membres du Policy Center et des participants à cette 11e édition des courants atlantiques. Cela est une tradition depuis longtemps, séculaire, je dirais, d'inaugurer les dialogues atlantiques avec l'inauguration et la présentation des courants atlantiques. Cette année, nous commémorons la 13e célébration et édition du 13e édition des dialogues atlantiques et 11e édition des courants atlantiques. Les courants atlantiques continuent à promouvoir et à faire un plaidoyer pour l'Atlantique.
Concept of Atlanticism between the North America and European Union, but it will also be inclusive of the South Africa and Latin America. This edition is very special. It has two features. The first one is the number of contributors. We have 30 authors that participated to the drafting of this report of 150 pages. It digs into the different dimensions of this wide Atlantic. If we try to compare the three oceans, the Atlantic stands apart as the one that is free of major conflict, as an area, as a basin that can inaugurate a new paradigm of partnership, a new paradigm of cooperation that could help the countries of the wide Atlantic to deal with the challenges, but also to seize these opportunities that the Atlantic is offering. This year is marked by the first celebration of the royal initiative of the wide Atlantic that includes not only the African countries that walk the Atlantic, but also the countries of the Sahel. The 11th edition tries to get into the benefits, into the merits, into the advantages of exploring this possibility by inaugurating a new paradigm of partnership and cooperation. We all know that the attention, the emphasis, especially in the light of the recent development, is on the Pacific, is on the Middle East, and maybe the Atlantic, I will not say is neglected, but is overshadowed by this predominant crisis. The Policy Center is trying to attract the world to the benefits of, I will not say not ignoring, not forgetting the Atlantic, but in exploring the possibilities that the Atlantic is offering. This year, in addition to the 30 contributions for which I would like to pay a tribute to all the authors, the 30 authors, I seize this opportunity to thank them, to tell them that their contribution is appreciated by the community of the Policy Center for the New South. So in addition to these contributions, we decided to add, as an illustration of the potential of the wide Atlantic, we decided to include some maps that eloquently reflect this potential of the Atlantic. You have before you the three oceans with the mega cities, with the most important ports. As a matter just of comparison, you can see the intensity activities and the concentrations if you compare the different oceans. The second, if I may have the second one is about all the potentials of the continental Africa in terms of ports, in terms of airports, in terms of resources, natural resources. The third one is about the positioning of Morocco towards the Atlantic Africa. It reflects the economic presence, the banking system, the connectivity between Morocco and the other Atlantic countries. And finally, with a view to really highlight the potential of the Atlantic Africa, we decided to include a map of each and every Atlantic African country, where we put all the elements that we could gather in terms of natural resources, in terms of investment, but also, more importantly, in terms of the exclusive economic zone that has this advantage of expanding not only the territory of the coastal countries, but also in expanding the potential and the possibilities that this maritime space is offering to each and every member of the of Atlantic Africa. Finally, I would like to emphasize the fact that as you can see it by reading this 11th edition, many authors refer to initiatives that are taken in terms of trying to boost this possibility, this new paradigm of cooperation through the Atlantic. In addition to the Royal Initiative, we have a reference and some kind even of comparison with the United States initiative that was taken in December 2023, but also to the existing mechanism in Latin America, like, for example, the SOPACAS. One thing that I would like to emphasize, and it will be the last point that on which I will put some emphasis, is the fact that this Royal Initiative is meant to complement the existing mechanism of African integration. African integration is built on horizontal, and this initiative, the Atlantic Initiative, is meant really to introduce this verticality in terms of cooperation, in terms of interaction, not only economic, not only in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of human development, because human development, as we know, is more and more in the center of the international concern and in the center of the policy that His Majesty has always, for the last 25 years, trying to implement and to push for. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you will enjoy this session. This session will continue with our 4 panelists. I will ask them 2 questions, and after that I will ask them to give a very brief overview of their contribution to this 11th edition. Unfortunately, I have to constrain them to 5 minutes to 6 minutes. I'm not going to be popular with my colleagues, but for the time of being really rational and stick to the program of this morning, I will ask them to be as brief as possible. And finally, I will not miss the opportunity to say that it feels very good to have the Atlantic dialogue in this very elegant and very pleasant setting of the headquarters of the Policy Center for the New South. So I would like to congratulate all those who pushed for providing the Policy Center for the New South with these elegant premises. Thank you.
Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 13th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference. Focuses on the Afro-Atlantic region, a dynamic area encompassing coastal and landlocked African countries, connected by shared challenges and opportunities within the Atlantic space. Morocco's Atlantic Royal Initiative envisions this region as a cohesive zone for resilience, cooperation and growth. This report outlines strategies for fostering economic integration, strengthening digital trust, and addressing socio-political challenges. By encouraging cross-border partnerships, Afro-Atlantic nations can tackle common issues, boost regional stability, and pursue sustainable development, reinforcing a resilient and interconnected future across the Atlantic basin. How can Afro-Atlantic nations collectively address economic nationalism and foster inclusive regional economic growth? What are the main geopolitical and security challenges facing the Atlantic basin? How can sectoral development be leveraged to foster resilience across Afro-Atlantic countries?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would like to invite our distinguished panelists to first to address two questions, if possible, in 5-6 minutes, because I want to first give you the opportunity to give a brief presentation of your article, your contribution to this edition. And I would like to leave 25 to 30 minutes for the audience if they have questions, and I'm sure that they will have questions to all of you. My two questions that are interrelated are the following. What are the main economic security challenges facing the Atlantic basin, and how regional alliance can help address them? The second question reads as follows: how can African Atlantic nations respond collectively to economic nationalism and foster inclusive economic integration? And when I refer to economic nationalism, you will understand that it is not limited exclusively to the countries of the South, but it is also a practice that sometimes we are borrowing from the global North. Mr. Hirsch, please.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here for the first time and I hope the last time. So I would like to you use the term economic security, economic and security. For me, they're very much related. I think the biggest challenge facing, and I'm going to talk mainly from an African perspective, being the only African panelist other than yourself. The main challenge is the current economic fiscal situation in Africa, the fact that we have very, very high levels of debt in many African countries, which began during the period of the global financial crisis, but became particularly severe during the COVID period, which has led to austerity policies, greater inequality domestically, greater poverty domestically in many African countries. Very, very few African countries have recovered. Some are facing the cost of transitions from the oil-based economies to post-carbon economies. And this is likely to lead to greater instability, greater insecurity in many African countries. So, in addition to that, I think there is the issue of global competition for African resources, the difficulty that African countries seem to face, or perhaps it's an opportunity in dealing with this global competition. So it's not only the great powers, which I guess are the United States and China, but it's also secondary or middle powers such as Russia, which has been involved particularly in parts of West Africa, Central Africa, as well as, I was very surprised to see that the reconciliation between Somalia and Ethiopia was announced by Turkey rather than by IGAD. Why aren't our regional institutions playing a bigger role in dealing with those domestic security situations? So I think the biggest problem is that we have allowed our regional peace and security institutions, those parts of our regional economic communities, ECOWAS, SADC, IGAD, EAC and others, we've allowed them to deteriorate under pressure, under political pressure. They haven't been able to take the lead as they have sometimes in the past to deal with these African problems through African institutions. In addition, I think what's very important for African countries, being a lot of small countries, even the biggest countries in Africa economically are small, is global multilateralism, and it's fundamentally important, particularly for the smaller countries of the world, to support and do everything they can to protect global multilateralism and the multilateral legal order from the threat that it is under at the moment. Thank you.
Don't you think that these challenges maybe go beyond the means that are at the disposal of this regional mechanism of preventing conflict?
Well, they certainly do at present. That's why I suppose I talked about the multilateralism and the multilateral institutions. So I think that the fundamental issue facing us at the moment is the debt issue, which Africa can't solve on its own. I don't think that the IMF or the World Bank have been playing the role that they ought to have been playing in addressing those issues. I think the way that the SDRs were distributed during COVID was inappropriate, and I don't think that either the IMF or the World Bank have the kind of comprehensive approach to the challenges that we have, that we need. So that's very important. On the security matters, if we don't have the regional resources, we are in trouble, because whoever we rely on externally will have some sort of an interest. So I think that we have to improve our regional and domestic security capabilities.
Do you think that the adoption by the General Assembly of Resolution 2719, that is taking the expenses of peacekeeping operations in Africa from the budget of the United Nations is a step in the right direction?
Well, clearly that's going to be a very important part of it. If the UN can play a bigger role than it is currently playing, and a more effective role than it's currently playing, I think sometimes the hands of the UN peacekeeping forces are tied too much as well, and that's part of the problem too.
Okay, thank you. Shadia, what is your take on these two questions?
Thank you, Mr. Lulichki. As it regards what are the main economic challenges facing the Atlantic Basin, I'm a St. Lucian woman who splits my time between Accra, Ghana, and the Caribbean. So I'll speak to two of what I think are the main ones. The first being climate change for the Caribbean region, increasing deficits that we face from natural disasters that have been noted to be the fruit of poor climate management across the world. And I would say in Ghana, Africa in general, West Africa in general, I would say weak governance is an economic challenge. As we know, Africa is not short of resources. Africa has pretty much everything that it needs to do well economically. in terms of physical resources, in terms of human resources. One of the largest youth populations in the world. Africa has what it takes to develop and to develop well. What we are seeing is weak governance. Ghana recently had an election, December 7th. I think 4% of the registered voters turned out. And this is a signal of how apathetic African societies are right now as it concerns democracy and governance. So 18 million registered voters, just under 1 million people going out to actually vote and make their position on how their country should be governed known. So weak governance in Africa, climate change in the Caribbean region. How do I think regional alliances can address these issues? I think the Atlantic region is well positioned to come together to solve these issues. I think we know of the Bridgetown Initiative that has been put forth by the Honorable Mia Motley out of Barbados. I think there is significant room for particularly the nations in the global south that fall within the Atlantic basin to come together and to lobby together to get certain things accomplished. So how do I think regional alliances do that? Could accomplish that? I think that's one of the reasons. I think also no shortage of ideas. There is simply an implementation deficit. So not just talking, but actually doing the work. I think regional alliances actually doing what they have set out to do, fulfilling their mandates. We can help solve some of these economic challenges. So I'm going to be very brief, and I'm just going to turn over to you. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that we all know that the group of small islands have been extremely instrumental in pushing the agenda for climate change and trying to make a difference when it comes to the outcome of this conference. Fabio from Brazil, do you see any shining signs for the wider Atlantic?
Well, let's see. First of all, I'm from Brazil, but it's good to be back home. I feel myself at home here. Thank you. First of all, you talked about paradigm, establishing a paradigm and the potential of the Atlantic countries to construct a mechanism of governance, and it's important. But firstly, I would like to highlight the nature of the international order, this world we live in. It's important to understand our challenge. I think the only certain thing we could say is that the world is upside down, just that. But there are a lot of theories that try to explain this world. Since the end of the Cold War, we have been trying to understand the nature of this world, and it's important. Some would say that we live in an unbalanced multipolarity, which means that we have a world, a kind of 1 + 1 + 3. What does it mean? One superpower, one asymmetric superpower, and some great powers. And the most likely result would be chaos in such a situation. Some would say that we are living a new Cold War order marked by a kind of bipolarity. Not like that of the Cold War, but something closely different, with China, United States, and the other countries doing a kind of bandwagoning from one to another country in search for their interests. Or, totally different, we can live in an age of non-polarity, where power is far more diffuse than ever before, in which everyone feels empowered. Here lies another problem. But, again, who are we? It's important to understand the challenges we face. And in this situation, what role the Atlantic could play in forming an area of peace and cooperation capable of aggregating the interests of those countries that share ties based on their Atlanticity. Our essence is our Atlanticity. It can be something that can define who we are. As pointed out by the famous political scientist Samuel Huntington, we only know who we are when we know who we are not, and often only when we know who we are against. It must sound a quite simple question, but it's too complicated to understand this situation. So, being said that, concerning the challenge and how can the Atlantic countries could respond to the challenge, I would say that we must overcome the asymmetries of the North and the South Atlantic, first of all, because some say that we live in an Atlantic basin. It's, in terms of geography, it matters, it's okay. But more important, we are different. We are Atlantic countries, but we have some challenges that must be faced before we talked about a single space. And of course, we have some disruptive challenges in this situation. Migration, climate change, as pointed out by my colleague, and maybe something that we can talk about is the planetary boundaries. We have crossed 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries. What does it mean? That we are getting closer to the point of no return. And amongst these boundaries, we have climate change, the acidification of oceans that combined can be the cause of the next biodiversity mass extinction. These are challenges that must face because isolated, all the initiatives are just like good islands, very good islands. But I think we are missing the bridges, connect them to make all these islands a true Atlantic archipelago. I'll finish here by now.
Okay, usually we say that when, first of all, we have to wait, I think, until the 25th of January to see if the world is going to be more chaotic or less chaotic. So that's one. The second is that when you feel that it is chaotic around you, I think you stick to your family and you stick to your immediate neighborhood, provided that your immediate neighborhood is not in the mood of aggressiveness and non-cooperative spirit. But I think that these multiple initiatives are exactly meant to deal with these uncertainties, with these vulnerabilities, by building, by promoting building blocks for regional integration, one. Secondly, by building bridges between different regions of the Atlantic, between Africa and Latin America, for example, in terms of exchange of good practices in agriculture, in technology, things like that. Don't you think that this is exactly what creates momentum for this initiative, including the Rail Initiative?
Yes, for sure. Because I think we have the potential to create, through this kind of interaction, connecting both sides of the Atlantic, bridges capable of giving us the opportunity for, I would call that, an Atlantic spillover effect, starting from in the social field, then spill over to the economic one, creating a feeling of belonging to the Atlantic. I think it's going to be a good start point.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
John.
Thank you very much. And I like the question of my colleague from Brazil of who we are, because I was thinking about that as well. But just to start this presentation and thinking about all the comments of the panelists, I think, of course, the matter of economy is really important for integration. But we cannot develop an economy if we don't care about the aspect of security. That is also the part of this question, you know. And when we start thinking about the Atlantic Ocean as the things that we share, that the Atlantic countries share, we have to think, of course, about matter of securities. And we have some big issues about security. And the other day I was doing some research and talking about with some people that is working in illegal fishery, and they're talking about, okay, we have a real problem in matter of fishery in the Atlantic Ocean, and this is affecting our natural resources. And so we start to looking for numbers and see, okay, if we have a problem, which is just, you know, let's see which is the economic outcome of this problem of fishery. And the thing is that it's illegal. So the numbers that we have, it's not clear the kind of the size of the problem that we have in matter of security of this. So sometimes we think about the Atlantic Ocean as a peaceful zone, maybe if we compare with other parts of the world, of course, but we do have really matter of securities that we have to deal with. And all these matter of securities are linked with kind of infrastructure and logistics. And we have to realize that we have great natural resources in the Atlantic Ocean, that all the countries that share the Atlantic Basin has access to that natural resources. And we have to really think about what is going on with this in the future, because maybe in the future things will change and we will not be so peaceful because we have access to all that kind of resources. And I do celebrate this kind of initiatives like the American one, the declaration of the UN. We don't know what's going to happen with Trump with that. You remember the case of the Pacific Alliance when he came, the TTIP, when he came to power. So maybe we are talking about this, and next month things will be different. But then the Royal Moroccan Initiative are good things to think about. And of course, it's difficult. We cannot think about initiative to have an Atlantic alliance and think that this is going to happen in the next month. It's something that it will take a lot of time. But I think that what my colleague from Brazil was saying about who we are is really important, because what we have, maybe because we came from neighbor countries, I think that what we have, one of the problems that we have is a problem of identity, okay? Because we talk about the Atlantic Basin, we talk about the wider Atlantic, and I think that the work of organizations like the Policy Center of New South is incredible in matter of start thinking about this. But we really have a problem of identity, because we need to know who we are first. And sorry for taking your question, but who we are first in order to see what we want in the future, in order to have the opportunity to deal with matter of securities and so on. So an important thing that even maybe we don't have the answer of who we are, I think we have the elements as country member of the Atlantic Ocean, the elements to grow on this. And of course, sharing an ocean is an important matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think you will agree with me if we say that in terms of who we are, first, we are a peace-loving nations. That's one. Secondly, we are open to cooperation. 3, we are in favor of equitable multilateralism, where everybody can have its say in. For Latin America and for Africa, solidarity means something, even if it is a moral principle, but it has something. I think that in terms of New South, I don't want to use the word of Global South because it's extremely diversified, different levels, different ideology, different attitude towards big issues. The New South is trying exactly to promote this kind of principles and this kind of values. So we have some elements to respond to what we are and who we are and what we stand for. Yes, please.
Okay, I think we have to stop thinking about concepts. When you say about that, about the global south, first we start to think about let's create a concept that it's comprehensive, the global south, okay, and then there is some countries that say I am the leader of the global south and I want to leader you and so on, and that's where the problem is because. To be honest, we are neighbor countries and we have so difference, but we have more difference if we think about India, for example. And then we say, okay, let's be part of the global south. But we are not the same. And this matter of the identity is like, okay, we share this, and this is that make us, as you said, peaceful nations that wants to cooperate and to grow, and then goes to action.
Well, I thank you because you managed to give me exactly the perfect transition to the second part of our session. Our colleague Fabio wrote about exactly identities and interests in the construction of an Atlantic security community, perspectives and challenges. You framed it as an intellectual exploration. Can you elaborate and enlighten us about the identity and the interest in the construction of this wide Atlantic?
Yes.
Again, in 5 minutes.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you to my neighbor here in the floor and in Latin America. We are neighbors. Identity matters. It's important. Interests are defined according to expectations mostly associated with a multiple of variables, such as material capabilities, perceptions and distribution of power, and, for our discussion here, identities. But what an identity is? It's a set of meanings that a state attribute to themselves in relation to others. It's something that solidify over time based on a continuous and historical social relations. This is identity. So, again, who are we in this fragmented order? This is one of the points I highlight in this paper, because I go a little bit further of this idea of the Atlantic Basin, because I would like to see further than this geographical perspective. What's this idea of an Atlantic security community? It's not something new. This idea was originally elaborated by Karl Deutsch in 1957 to define these regions composed of states that share fundamental values and behaviors to adapt their rules, common institutions, in order to live a peaceful coexistence, if possible. So, can we live in an Atlantic, or in this, as I try to demonstrate in this paper, in an Atlantic security community? It's not easy. Again, we have several initiatives in this regard, and I would like to highlight some initiatives from Morocco, because let me say that we are working on a book on Brazil-Morocco relations from an Atlantic perspective, working with my colleague here from the Atlantic Center, Fadila, that has done a very good work in this book. And we are trying to understand how can we construct something that can be useful in the development of a mechanism of governance of the Atlantic space. And I would highlight 3 core issues that can contribute for this endeavor. We need to think about common values such as peace, development, and security, mutual responsiveness, and let's, how could I say, mutual perception of belonging to a single space. It's easier to say, of course, it's easier to say, but as I told in the paper, it's just an idea. And we are trying to understand this space, but we need to overcome these challenges that are resilient, like the asymmetries between the North and the South Atlantic, before talking about a single space. In a nutshell, this is the arguments developed along this paper.
Thank you. Santiago, you wrote an article about the opportunities of a wide Atlantic, the need for new paradigms for the region. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the scope of this new paradigm that you imagine that could be helpful for promoting a wider Atlantic cooperation?
Well, maybe here in this audience, talk about the wider Atlantic and say, okay, it's something that we realize that we are all agree of going on this, but this is not the reality, at least from where I came from the south and the Atlantic South in Latin America. I think we have one of the problems that we have here or there is that we all the time we have a kind of Eurocentric perspective, you know, and we want to negotiate with Europe, and of course we have the cultural ties. My family, I am Uruguayan, but my family is Greek and Italian at the same time. But I think that what we need to do is this, what I mentioned in the article, is this kind of paradigm shift, and start thinking about, we really want this, okay? Maybe we have more in common with the countries of South Africa or Africa, the North Africa. I'm talking about the continent, not the country, sorry. But we have more in common with them than maybe with other countries in the world, and that we are more used to work together. So this paradigm shift that I'm talking about is just, first of all, realize that we have an opportunity in the Atlantic Ocean. We don't. I think that when from this Latin America, sometimes we don't think about the Atlantic Ocean as an opportunity of growing together. We think more about Europe or North America. But the thing is that maybe we have to start thinking about that. Maybe we have more in common with countries of Africa, and sometimes, of course, we have some cultural things that are different in some kinds, but we need to cooperate and we need to go that. But I'm not talking only about theory, you know. To come here, I need to go to Europe and then come to Africa. I asked my friend from Brazil, he came to Portugal and then came here. So it's everything. It's logistics. Is thinking about that. We can go further if we are together, okay? And of course, it's difficult to think about matter of integrations in matter of something so big, because one of the problems that we have in the Atlantic is the dimension of the Atlantic. And of course, it's difficult to think about what we do in a space that is so broad and so difficult to go. But the thing is that we have to start doing things, you know. I think that the worst, one of the things I say in the article, that one of the worst things to do is to think that it's difficult to start thinking about a wider Atlantic and going deeper on that. We have to start working on that. Maybe it's not going to be easy. We have to start thinking about the things that we have in common. And when we think about the things that we have in common, we will realize that we have a lot of things in common. And why is that? Realize that when, and I celebrate in the article of the kind of initiatives like the Royal Moroccan Initiative, and of course the American one, if it continues. But we have to be honest as members of the Atlantic Basin of what we want. And once we are honest, we have to say, okay, we want to do this, and we want to negotiate and create together something that is better for all of us.
Thank you. Well, I see that the cultural aspects maybe also has been illustrated in the signing of the agreement between European Union and Mercosur lately. But don't you think that promoting South-South cooperation between Latin America and Africa, with Africa despite the crisis, is developing itself, is going to be in 2050 about 1 billion to 25 million, and that some kind of complementarity between Latin America and Africa could boost the negotiating power, the bargaining power of Latin America with all other parts, European Union, the United States, etc. And that could transcend the cultural elements and even the lack of trust that you indicated in your article.
But you know, it's good the example of the Mercosur and European Union agreement, because one of the aspects that the negotiators highlights about this agreement, that we have cultural ties, you know, and we spent 20 years negotiating the deal. We arrived to a deal 5 years ago, I think, or 3 or 4 years ago. We celebrate a lot. Then nothing happened. Last week, we celebrate again that we arrived to a new agreement. But the day after, the parliaments of Europe say, no, this agreement is not helping us because we have our farms to care about and agriculture's products. Imagine that we go to Latin America and so on. So if we think about maybe we trust a lot, you know, we have been 25 years negotiating. That is too much time. 25 years is too much time. Sometimes you say, of course, it's international things and things are difficult, but 25 years is too much time. And I think that maybe we have to, when we talk about Africa and the South-South cooperation, we have to start thinking about that we really have things in common, okay? And I asked my colleagues in Uruguay to try the Moroccan tea, and they will love it. So let's do this. Let's try to think about that.
I can add two more elements. You have in this country at least about 6 million people that speak Spanish. That's the heart of culture. Secondly, needless to talk about football, the next World Cup is going to be shared between Europe, Africa, and Latin America. So this is also a token of this kind of complementarity and new pathways to cooperate. Now let's be a little bit more focused on some aspect. I know that migration is very attractive to so many, and you cannot go to any meeting in any setting without talking about migration. Mr. Hirsch devoted his article to migration governance, paradoxes, and realistic pathways. He dismissed some perceptions about Africa and migration. He is advocating the fact that the Global South trends are for more openness, more tolerance than in the relations with the North. And you see some potential pathways forward. Can you elaborate on these very promising formula of cooperative migration that can be beneficial for both the North and the South?
Potentially, I hope, and it has to be in the medium to long term, I think. So migration, I think, has been catastrophized in recent times. There's a sense, I've seen so many headlines, migration crisis, this. International organizations talk about migration crisis. The level of migration, however it's measured, is no higher today than it was 150 years ago during the great European movement to the Americas in particular, but also to other parts of the world. And it's not a lot higher than the long-term global average rate of about 3%. The paradox, well, many paradoxes, but the paradoxes are that what politicians say is very often unrelated to reality and very often unrelated to the policies that they actually implement. So we have the situation where there's a risk of increasing economic nationalism, and protectionism. The right-wing populists are putting migration on the table as a political weapon. The center and the left are not saying, actually, it's not such a problem. They're saying, okay, we'll do it better than the right. And then the left and center fail and strengthen the right-wing populists. And that's one of the risks that we are facing globally at the moment. Now, there are opportunities. In the north, borders are closing quite a lot. So the action of the Biden administration in June this year to tighten the borders had quite a dramatic effect. The recent formalization of the European Migration Pact has also been focused a lot on strengthening border and border protection and those sort of things. Whereas in the south, as you said, I think Mercosur is the example that we in Africa, I think, should be looking to. What's happened in South America over the last 25 odd years in terms of moving forward on integration is quite remarkable. In Africa, we are making progress. I won't talk about that now. I think that the key thing is that there are processes through which the growing gap between labour's demand and labour supply between the north and the south can be filled and to help to address that migration problem. In the north, the ratio of people working to the ratio of people not working is declining very rapidly, and by 2050 will be less than 20% of what it is currently. It's an extreme situation, and robotization and AI are not going to make up for it. In Africa, we have more and more educated people and more people in general who are able to fill that gap. So countries around the world have been experimenting, even in Europe and in the United States, have been experimenting on how to find ways forward. Some of them are doing it kind of under the table, so it's something that happens, but politicians don't talk about. In the case of Spain, the Prime Minister Sanchez has actually taken a stronger position, saying we have a choice. We have a choice between prosperity and blocking migration. And Spain has introduced a number of new mechanisms for encouraging long-term and circular migration. Other European countries, Germany has relationships with Morocco over IT specialists and engineers. They have a relationship with Kenya over health workers. Even Italy, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, they all are developing new systems of both long-term migration, particularly for the highly skilled people, and shorter-term and circular migration, which is fair to people, unlike the practice which has been the case in recent times. For example, the African experience in the Gulf states hasn't always been a very rosy one. I think there are examples growing about how to treat circular migrants better so that they're able to move on a long term. They could have a 5-year contract, they could earn their money. In fact, Morocco's relationship to Spain, up to the point at which Europe became a fortress, Moroccans were constantly moving backwards and forwards between Spain and Morocco, and that's something we could get back to in quite a profitable way for the African continent as a whole, and particularly in its relationship to Europe.
Thank you. When you refer to the Moroccan Spanish, that's called pragmatism. It's regardless of the tension that might come between the two countries, we have always managed to keep things under control and to really look for the future and see to what extent we can work out a very pragmatic and very mutually beneficial solution. You emphasize the legality of migration, and Shadia is also emphasizing the concept of legality in terms of the African countries implementing the 2063 vision. You refer particularly to a very particular situation in Ghana. You draw some conclusions, and at the same time, I think you brought two good examples that could be followed by other countries, Botswana and Ghana. Can you tell us more about your finding about the GLAMC situation, and then to what extent these two countries managed to adopt a very intelligent and very not legalistic, but very legitimate policy towards natural resources and the implementation of the rule of law.
So, as you said, my article addresses a very specific issue, GLAMC. This is the popular colloquial name for small-scale illegal mining in Ghana. And what we see with GLAMC, recently there's been an uprising by the populace speaking about a new legislative instrument passed by the government of Ghana, Legislative Instrument 2462, which basically gives permission for certain groups, certain benefactors to be able to mine in what should be forest reserves. And the Ghanaian populace has uprisen and said that, hey, this is illegal. But when the legislature that is to govern this sphere of things is examined, we find that there is absolutely no clause that expressly forbids illegal mining in forest reserves in Ghana. What we find is that the Forest Acts of 1927, it actually gives the president of Ghana sweeping, expansive powers to extend leases and permits to further and better manage mining within forest reserves. And what we see here is legislative drafting that is dependent on the notion of a benevolent leader. And not that there's anything wrong with a benevolent leader. If a benevolent leader is in fact benevolent, then it is to the benefit of his or her country. But what happens when a benevolent leader is not being benevolent, as in the case of Ghana, where we are now permitting certain elements to conduct small-scale mining in forest reserves? We now must call for legislative drafting to be something, or let me just say, legislative drafting should align with the rule of law, where it is clear, where no one is above the law, and everyone is treated equally under the law. And if it is drafted in such a way, then something like what is happening in Ghana with Legislative Instrument 2462 would not be happening, right? So basically what I've said is that the case of GLAMC in Ghana is a great lens, not just for Ghana, but for other African countries to take a look at how legislative drafting may or may not facilitate the aims of Agenda 2063. And I mean, we can go through the 7 aspirations of Agenda 2063 and see how GLAMC would undermine each of the aspirations, the 7 aspirations. So we want to ensure that Africa has robust legal frameworks that are not dependent on benevolent leaders or giving expansive powers to certain powers, to better facilitate the actualization of Agenda 2063. And I think you asked about countries. I think I used the case of Namibia, who has shown to be a decent example in terms of how more robust legal frameworks are facilitating development. And I can't remember which other country that I put in there, because there are a couple. But I think Namibia is a great example of how a country has used proper legislative drafting, an African country, to facilitate development. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate my colleagues because they helped me manage the time. Now I would like to turn to our audience. I will pick 4 to 5 questions that the first set, and if time allows, we will take 3 or 4 other questions before giving the opportunity to the 4 panelists to make a final comment. Yes, Zaid. Wait for the microphone.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes, we do.
Mr. Moderator and good friend, thank you very much for the presentation, and I thank also all the participants to the panel and who are contributors also to the report. I don't think in this very limited time we can discuss all these ideas which have been discussed. I have heard, I think, the moderator from Brazil saying that the need is to build bridges. And he spoke about economic bridges and social bridges. My question is, can you explain what do you mean by social bridges? Because it's very important, and how can these social bridges be built? I want just to make a very small comment. I participated in 1982 in Addis Ababa to a seminar organized by Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, about the cooperation between Africa and South America or Latin America. It was for 3 days, and I will not tell you the conclusions. Many countries from Latin America and Africa have gone through very important changes. And we would like to see, I think it is time to think about how to structure this cooperation. The need is there. We don't have to find what we have in common. We have in common one very important thing, that is our humanity and our needs to cooperate to satisfy these needs. How can we do it? The North Atlantic have done it. We should take an example and see how we can develop it. But it is important to see, because the economic cooperation, I think it's very well known, but the social bridges, it's very important. Identity, I think we have many things in common and many differences. We don't need to develop that. Thank you very much.
You. From one ambassador to another ambassador. Mrs. Shkroni, Ambassador Shkroni, please.
So thank you very much, Si Mohammed, and thank you for this really instructive session. My name is Nisa Shkroni. I'm Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. I'm really interested in the question you raised about the identity. And I would like to know, in your point of view, what could be the perspective to build a new identity? Shall we dip in the past and to know more about our history and to try to develop some common elements to build on it? Or are you seeking to build this on the future? And what could be the elements for the future that can be the foundation for this new identity? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. Okay, we have Lynn Ismail here, my colleague and senior fellow to the Policy Center. Lynn Ismail, she's here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my friend and colleague and everybody here. My name is Len Ishmael. I'm a senior fellow with the Policy Center for the New South. I was just intrigued a little bit by the way in which we frame the conversation. We're talking about aspiring towards a wide Atlantic, but the wide Atlantic has existed for a very, very long time. And we seem not to reflect a little bit on the history, which speaks very directly to the ties that bind us, whether it's Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, particularly West Africa, and the North as well, both the United States and Europe. So I would suggest that going forward, as we speak in whatever publications there are, instead of reinventing what the wide Atlantic means, we need to reflect a little bit on what it has historically meant, because that hasn't changed. Second quick comment I would make is that we keep on talking too about the need to reflect a little bit or find the things that we have in common. But there was a time we didn't have to find those things. We knew those things. When we formed the non-aligned movement, when we formed the Pan-African movement, to which so many in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa, and the diaspora devoted themselves. We knew exactly who we were, what we had in common, and what we were fighting for. So when we speak now about elaborating a new concept, first to find common ground, I'm not quite sure what we are missing. And the last quick thing that I would like to say is that I think it might be a little bit naive for us to consider the Atlantic as a zone of peace. It never has been. Whether or not we want to admit it or not is something else. There are great power rivalries as well, which affect the choices we make. And the question I would ask the panelists, two things. Are these times which are so disruptive, divisive, an opportunity for the wider Atlantic, particularly the South, to rally in solidarity again? Or is it disruptive to a point which, in fact, is inimical to our best interest? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. When we talk about stable Atlantic Ocean, we refer to the absence of a major conflict like in other oceans. Yes, please, let's continue.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I want to also go back to the issue of identity because it intrigues me a little bit. The reason it intrigues me is because identity by definition excludes. When you, in terms of humanity, when you look at a group of people and try to identify, you exclude somebody in that very architecture. And I would have thought that where humanity is at the moment, we actually need to identify ourselves at that level, not at a lower level. Because the challenges we face today are challenges to humanity, not to subgroups of humanity. And we can only confront them if we firstly embrace that inclusive identity in order to then confront those challenges that threaten all of us collectively, rather than subgroups of us. So I would like to hear what our eminent speakers have got to say.
Your point is valid, provided that you believe in humanity. Yes. One, and I think we will close the first set, and we will come back. I promise you, we will come back.
Thank you for this compelling panel. My name is Najib Bunahai, and I'm a professor here at Faculty of Governance, Economic and Social Sciences. I have a point relating, of course, to identity. And I think one thing to be mindful of is that we should not think about identity as a seamless fabric. Because identity, the way we conceive it, is bound to be fragmented, is going to be compound, is going to be, I would say, hyphenated. And I would really second the point that was raised by our colleague Len Ishmael. Memory is involved. And therefore, we cannot think about any reflection of identity in the absence of memory. And instead of just talking about building social bridges, I think we need to build memory bridges. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we have enough on our plate. Who will go first? Yes, please.
Dr. Ishmael's concerns. And perhaps we share very similar views because we hail from the same country. In that we do have an identity. I wrote my master's thesis on AU-CARICOM relations. And one of the things that I pointed out is that the Caribbean is, in essence, Africa washed by the Caribbean, with countries whose shores are washed by the Caribbean Sea. We also have the African Union that has designated a sixth region that has said that the Caribbean is part of Africa as far as the African Union goes. So she asked a question. Are the issues emerging within the Atlantic Basin, are they an opportunity for us to come together? Or are they an opportunity to make us more divergent? And I think they're an opportunity to bring us closer together. I have long advocated for solving simultaneously the problems of development that Africa and the Caribbean share. And there are many areas which we can solve simultaneously. We can solve the issues simultaneously. We both have the problem of food security. We are very similar in the foods that we eat. We are very similar in terms of our climate, in terms of what we grow. Africa has huge amounts of arable land. I think these are issues that Africa and the Caribbean can solve simultaneously. We see Barbados attempting to solve the issue of brain drain by hiring Ghanaian nurses. So between 2022 and now, I think Barbados has brought in about 370 Ghanaian nurses in small batches to solve their problem of brain drain, of their nurses leaving Barbados and going to more developed nations. So another problem, climate change. We see, again, Prime Minister Mia Mottley taking the forefront and not speaking just on behalf of Barbados, but speaking on behalf of all developing nations that are feeling the brunt of climate change and asking for there to be a debt swap. So to answer your question, Dr. Ishmael, I think that the problems that emerge within the Atlantic Basin provide an opportunity for Atlantic nations whose identity I think has been well cemented to work towards solving problems simultaneously. And as for me, I am a very avid advocate of Africa and the Caribbean solving their problems simultaneously. So thank you.
Thank you. Have you?
Let me begin.
Okay.
Alan?
I'd like to respond to the question about embracing our common identity. I think for Africans, first we have to, we can do both. We can embrace our common identity with Latin America and with other parts of the Atlantic Basin. But first we have to embrace our own identity more than we do at the moment. A great African social scientist who died too early, Thandika Mkandawira, used to talk about how we have a notion of Africanness that is quite deep. This, the Africa as a map that symbolizes all of our identity. Some of the culture, the music, the orientation in terms of philosophical orientation. We have all that, and yet we've been unable to move towards that level of embracing that identity in a way that is as powerful as Europe has done over the last 40 or 50 years, with perhaps less in common. In the European, many more languages and many more cultural differences within Europe, I think, perhaps than in Africa, and certainly not that notion of Africanness. And then again, with South America and the Caribbean, we share languages. We shared both the European languages, some African customs and beliefs and tastes and rhythms, there is so much that we do have in common that we could be embracing much more than we do.
These are very good questions, and I'm happy because we are opening a black box when we talk about identity. And I do believe that identity matters. Let me say that my paper is much more optimistic than me. But it's something that we have to take into consideration. Yes, identity excludes. Yes, it's true. Because this sense of community, it's a long-standing and serious problematic epistemological issue, because a sense of we always requires another against which to define itself, and it can be dangerous somehow. The issue of a wider Atlantic, it always exists, it's true. But we need to understand these differences if we think about the essence of the Atlantic in a wider perspective. I think the problem remains. The Atlantic history is a painful one, marked by issues such as the colonization, slavery, the dispute of great powers over history. Yes, it was a problem that we must be taking into consideration, but it's the first point if we think about a true wider Atlantic, an inclusive wider Atlantic. This is the perspective I would like to highlight in this panel. Considering the construction of social bridges, yes, it's very important issue, because when, for example, in Latin America, because I have here a neighbor, we try to construct with the UNASUR initiative a kind of identity. Does it exist? No. Brazil, for example, was perceived as something evil by the neighborhood, because we speak Portuguese, we were a monarchy in the middle of republics, and identity is not something that we can find out there. It takes time to solidify. It takes time, but I think it's important to define who we are in this process. And when we talk about social bridges, of course, it's a very difficult issue to tackle with, but I think the point is to find out a common ground for action, because when we look to Latin America and Africa, we see a lot of similarities, but also differences, and these differences must be overcome by constructing social bridges in this way, I think.
Yes.
Thank you. It's good to hear that some of the comments are quite controversial with the things that we said, because that means that we have a lot of work to do. So
yeah, it makes the debate more exciting.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and you can keep the attention of the audience also.
So yes, that's great. But I will start with the third question. When he talked about the conference, it was 1982. You said, no?
Yes. 82.
Yes, I was born in 1989. So you cannot blame me for that. But if you were discussing that so many years ago, we have done something wrong. So if we need to blame someone, maybe government is easier. But I think that all of us has something to do with this, you know. But it's important to think that we have to do some things, and we have to change the things as we were done. And I don't think it is new. We weren't talking about, it's not a new concept, the Wide Atlantic, and I get your point, and I understand what you said. But I think, what I wrote in the article, that we need to think differently in the way we think about the Wide Atlantic, at least from our perspective. Maybe I think you agree with me on that. And the matter of peaceful, I don't think it's naive what we said on that point, if we compare with other regions that have other problems, but I get your point on that, and I understand. And the exclusion, I think the exclusion is fine, because we create our identity to grow together. That doesn't mean that we're going to go against others, I think that sometimes when we create a concept, we want to go against the other concept, okay? We create the concept of global south to go against the global north, and that's not the idea if we want to increase. And maybe this is naive, because we want to, sometimes we need an enemy to growth. But I don't think that is the best way if we want to create something and go deeper in the Atlantic Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. I only have 8 minutes and 18 seconds. I would like to ask those who will ask the questions to ask very, very short ones, and I will ask the panelists to respond in 1 minute or 1 minute and a half. I can be generous sometimes. And so, yes, please, the gentleman in the first row.
Merci, vous me permettez de parler en français?
Yes.
Je ne suis ni ambassadeur, ni senior fellow. Personne n'est parfait.
Donc vous êtes parfait.
J'ai posé des questions un peu terre à terre. Pour donner un corps au dialogue atlantique, le rendre une réalité économique, sociale et humaine, la connectivité joue un rôle essentiel. Et la coopération économique et sociale. Et j'aimerais signaler à nos amis que depuis samedi dernier, la Royal Air Maroc a repris sa desserte sur le Brésil. Donc mes amis brésiliens n'auront plus besoin de passer par l'Europe pour venir à Casablanca ou pour aller en Afrique. Et cela rentre dans le cadre d'une stratégie volontariste de Royal Air Maroc, le transporteur marocain, de connecter les Amériques vers le Maroc et au-delà, vers l'Afrique. Deuxième élément important, puisque moi je suis terre à terre, je suis un opérateur, je voudrais signaler que nous avons signé au mois d'octobre un accord de partenariat lourd, important, qui portera, j'espère, s'il est développé comme on le prévoit, sur près de 1 milliard de partenariat entre un acteur dans la construction aéronautique Embraer brésilien et le Maroc. Ceci veut dire que nous serons exemplaires entre le Maroc et le Brésil, à côté du partenariat historique qui a été développé dans le domaine des engrais, des fertilisants avec l'OCP. Deux pays du Sud ont un partenariat dans un domaine d'excellence dans l'industrie, la première industrie de la connaissance, l'aéronautique. Je pense que ça donne quand même des idées, ça peut donner des idées et ça peut donner des éclairages sur ce que nous pouvons faire ensemble pour construire ensemble, pour notre jeunesse, un avenir commun. Merci.
Merci pour vos questions qui étaient parfaites. Bon, lorsque j'ai commencé cette session, on m'a demandé de rester sans regarder uniquement devant moi, et donc je me suis fait des adversaires et des ennemis derrière mon dos, et donc il m'appartient de me rattraper un peu. Alors.
My back because I was not looking at them and watching them.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay.
Merci, monsieur l'ambassadeur.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Well, I would like to thank my previous colleague for freeing the speech in English. Unlike him, I'm a diplomat, so that's my default. And maybe through this professional bias, I will be asking a question, or my question, precisely on the issue of identity. And this is one of the most important questions that raised from this debate and this panel. But maybe I will, I'm going to propose this compromise here, because the issue on identity has really led to the ideology debate. Now we are talking about Atlantic. I think we should talk more about the strategic identity. And here the whole conception will change, because what's happening now and what we're doing now is the construction of a strategic identity of this part of the Atlantic that is crossing the African continent. So talking about Afro-Atlantic strategy, isn't it really the response to this issue of identity that you rightly raised earlier on? Thank you.
All of you, because I have my topic for the 12th edition of Atlantic Current. Identities, differences, and specificities, and how to overcome them in the wide Atlantic. So you, if there are any volunteers, please let me know. Now let's, yes, one, and I think I will close the list of, yes, please.
Bonjour, donc je m'appelle Fedwa Marie, je suis docteur en relations internationales. Cette question d'identité,
This identity issue, I mean, cannot be addressed without addressing borders, in particular African borders. So I am wondering, and I'm asking the question to the panelists and to everyone, in fact, on whether this is the discussion on whether this conversation on borders in Africa, whether this is meant to be showcased or prioritized. And we all know that this dates back to quite a long time. I mean, to the Dakar Conference, which was held in 1985. And we do know that most of the security issues in Africa stem from borders and identity, which is the most notorious, one of the most notorious issues here. So I'm wondering whether, on the sidelines of this question on territories, whether African leaders are poised to partially sacrifice their sovereignty to, gain this integrated or federal Africa. Thank you.
Merci. Vous soulevez une question qui.
An instrumental question, where indeed there is a common denominator between Africa and Latin America. So this is indeed a concept that we've borrowed from Latin America, but that we haven't properly enforced or applied in Africa.
Question, and then I have only 1 minute each. So if I go beyond for 5 minutes, I will not be penalized by our president. Please go ahead.
Okay. I love the discussion about identity, which I think is interesting, but I wanted to take a more pragmatic approach. Why don't we have something similar to APAC in the Atlantic? They just had a very successful meeting. The Chinese have invested in Peru. We have seen the world moving in that direction, shifting to the Pacific region. Why don't we start discussing more pragmatic issues on how to do it? And why don't we have something similar to that? That's my question.
All right. Please. 1 minute. No, let's say 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So I'm very pleased you asked this question, but so late in the session. This is the focus of my work. Africa signed at the AU summit in 2018 a free movement of persons protocol to the African Integration Treaty. 33 countries signed it, 4 have ratified it, nothing has happened. I think there's great consternation in the AU about where to go now. That's the bad news. The good news is that within the regional economic communities, there is much more movement. So in ECOWAS and in the EAC in particular, it is possible to move cross borders, often without even passports, as long as there are proper identification documents. It's increasingly easy to find work in neighboring countries within those regions. In SADC, we've advanced not quite as far as the ECOWAS and EAC, and then some of the other regional economic communities are a little bit behind. I think that the opportunity, but what we do see is the progress is significant. As I mentioned earlier, but very briefly, the trend in the south is different from the trend in the north. We need to take it much further. I think we need to find a way to strengthen those regional economic communities and enforce the legal systems in those regional economic communities, the courts of justice and other, the legal systems that enforce the implementation of the treaties within those regions are currently sometimes quite established institutions, but effectively are really weak institutions. That's one area we can move, and ultimately we have to move beyond our regional organizations being partnerships of countries to being relatively sovereign institutions as well.
Close by saying that I am in total agreement with our colleague over here. I think the approach that we've taken to connecting the Atlantic has actually been quite a fragmented approach, one where we see various regions vying for predominance. So for example, you have the AU CARICOM faction, then you have the faction that says, okay, Africa should probably focus on ties with Latin America because it seems more economically expedient because of the size, obviously, forsaking the small island developing states because they're too small and seemingly insignificant. So I think he's given us quite a fantastic approach that really helps us establish solidarity in a fragmented world, when what we've been really doing is approaching it from a fragmented perspective. I was here last year for the first time, and I felt that the Caribbean region was being forsaken. Again, this time, I feel like the Caribbean region is put on the back burner because we're seen as small island developing states and not really being able to make a significant contribution. So I thank you for your contribution, and I'm definitely on board with your idea that, why don't we just make it one group, one block, as in the wider Atlantic, and focus on building the solidarity together instead of the fragmented approach.
Thank you. Fabio? Recommendation, concluding remarks, whatever.
It's a very good discussion, very good discussion. I would like to highlight some aspects, highlight that identity has led to ideology. Yes, it's true. But ideology is much more than identity. I had the opportunity to attend a conference in Moscow last year, and I heard the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, saying that the war was not against Ukraine. It was against the collective West. What does it mean? It's ideology. But ideology is much more than just identity, because especially in this time of war of narratives. My Brazilian Chinese friend, yes, we need to be pragmatic. Yes, of course. You mentioned the program of infrastructure of China with Peru. Yes, but how to do it? Again, we must understand who we are to be pragmatic. They are not just one thing. Do not exclude the other. I think, and Let me see the other question. Human connectivity concerning, yes, this flight, direct flight from Brazil to Morocco. Oh, it's good, very good. It's 9 hours from Brazil to Lisbon, for example, and then 1 hour more. Yes, it's not good.
We have one from Johannesburg as well.
And we are here.
Yeah. No, to Brazil.
To Brazil, to Brazil, yes, of course. Let me see that Brazil-Morocco has worked on joint projects for the development of the defense industrial base. Yes. It's important.
Yes, right. Yeah.
But it takes time, again, to understand how can we work together.
Well, thank you. Fabio, the problem that you create with the identity in this session, no?
Yeah.
I think you didn't imagine that. Just really short. Are you hearing me? Yes?
Yes, yes.
Okay. First of all, I like to be pragmatic, and I think that the matter of connectivity is great. You know, when I was coming here, I spent 22 hours, and when my flight was, I was like seeing in the map that it was in Africa, and I need to continue my trip to Europe and come back again. I say, okay, we have a problem here.
Yes.
We really have a problem here. So the matter of connectivity is really important. And I'm not going to talk, I like the pragmatic approach, but I'm not going to talk to China because I think we need a session, a special session, because the approach that China is getting with Latin American countries, it's quite interesting. But I think we need a special session on that. And finally, with the matter of compromise, I think we really need to compromise with that. I think after this session, we can conclude that we have a problem of identity. And I think that part of the compromise is the work of organizations like the Policy Center of the New South. So thank you very much for being here and for having this great discussion with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I was extremely happy and honored to moderate this panel. And I would like you to join me for a round of applause for this esteemed... And I thank you for your attendance and your patience with us. And I wish this a very successful 13th session of the Atlantic Dialogue. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation this morning. We will now break for lunch at the pavilion located behind this building. The New South is organizing the 13th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, scheduled to take place from December 12th to 14th, 2024, in Rabat, Morocco. This flagship event will convene over 400 distinguished leaders from the public and private sectors, civil society, international organizations, think tanks, and the media across the Atlantic Basin, fostering open and candid discussions on pivotal cross-regional and cross-sectoral challenges. This year's conference marks a significant evolution, transitioning from annual thematic focuses to a broader, more inclusive approach emphasizing the wider Atlantic space's core values and strategic importance. The agenda will delve into critical topics such as geoeconomics, regional security, democracy, migration, and the energy transition, with a particular emphasis on the African Atlantic region. Participants will engage in over 11 plenary sessions, interactive town halls, thematic breakout dinners, and intimate night owl sessions, all designed to encourage meaningful dialogue. The Atlantic Dialogues Emerging Leaders 2024 program will bring together more than 40 young changemakers across the Atlantic. These emerging leaders will participate in a tailored leadership, policy and networking program, fostering intergenerational dialogue and bridging generational and perception gaps. Building on the previous 12 editions, this 13th edition will be a platform conducive to navigating the complexities of the Atlantic region and working collaboratively towards a more integrated and prosperous wider Atlantic. For more information, visit our website, atlanticdialogues.org.